Hello, I'm Jonathan O'Toole of the Terror of God podcast at terrorofgod.com. I'm here with Robert Hardesty, my good friend Bob Hardesty. Take it away, Bob.
Hardesty. Yeah, and Bob Hardesty with Bob Hardesty Talks and Panzer Talks, and we're here to discuss birth control and contraception.
That's right. I think you might have organized your thoughts a little bit better for the purpose of introducing. So could you go ahead and take it away, Bob, and I'll jump in.
Okay. We have the application of God's command to all human beings in the natural world. We find things in Genesis 1, be fruitful and multiply. And then we have more God's commands to Christians about discipling the world and such. So throughout the conversation, there will be parts that will lean to one or the other. The question is, why would somebody want to use birth control? Now, it is to limit having a child or restrict entirely having a child. And the first question comes up is, who should be making that decision? Are you God? Who gets created is the place of the sovereign of the universe to decide. Not me, not you. But we want to rebel against God. It's in our sin nature. When Adam and Eve fell, all of us descendants of Adam and Eve fell with them. And God defined in Genesis 3 how that sin nature would play out in the man. The man's role in the world is to face the world, to make a difference in the world, to engage the world, to cultivate it for good. That's why he made Adam a gardener, because his job and every man's job is to cultivate the world around him for good. Now, that he would have hard trouble in getting the world to respond to him, the ground would produce thorns and thistles and such, that he would have frustration in applying his masculinity to the world. And to the woman, the sin nature manifests in that she would have trouble and pain in childbirth, because in the pureness of femininity, women want to give birth to children. They want to rear children. They find their meaning in that. Okay, she would have trouble and pain in childbirth, and she would desire to manipulate and control and dominate her husband, which is another video, but it's easily provable in text. That's what it says. She would desire her husband.
For just a moment,
when she rule over her.
Right, when the King James, for example, says, her desire shall be for thee, but you shall overrule her. That doesn't mean her libido, her sexual desire. It means her desire shall be to overrule your decisions, but you'll overrule her decisions. In paraphrase, is that
it's the
fair?
Same thing as, because over in the next chapter where God is talking to Cain, he said, and it's funny because it's basically the same sentence in the original Hebrew. He said,
Sin lieth at the
desires
door.
to have you, but you must master it. It's the same sentence with different pronouns.
Different pronouns, different subject and object. Yeah.
The woman desires to have the husband, the same way sin desired Cain. So that is the manifestation of the sin nature
similarity
in the woman.
before. Sorry to talk over you. I noticed the similarity before, but I'd never heard it said that way. Yeah. That those two passages are the same, phrase.
They are. But the sin nature is customized to the man, and the sin nature is customized to the woman. This is every man. This is every woman. This is a truth. And the thing about the sin nature is underneath of it, it simply wants its own way. Like a spoiled little kid that has no parents around and he has the run of the house all the time and does whatever he wants.
It's self-will.
He wants, craps on the floor, eats the fruity pebbles all the time for every meal. This is what sin nature wants, running around in the world. And it doesn't show up how bad it is till, as the Bible says, the law comes and reveals this sin nature in us. It reveals that we don't want to do what's right. we are opposed to doing what we're told. We're opposed to the one who would tell us what to do, and that is God. Mm-hmm. And it's like children who, when dad comes in, he says, I thought I told you to put your bicycle in the garage. And we throw a fit because we just don't like dad telling us to do anything. Dad is the one in charge of the household. It's his authority that runs the household. God runs the universe, the whole universe. And we have an aversion to his rulership. And that is an old German phrase, Vaterhass, hatred of the Father. We hate the fatherhood of God in our sin nature. And that's going to be expressed in men certain ways and in women certain ways, because that is the driving force, Vaterhass, behind our sin nature. That is its ethos. Now, when it comes to children,
a deep-rooted hatred of the Father as the Father.
Yes, exactly, and it's in us. It is exactly everything of the serpent tempting Eve at the tree. It is the nature of Satan when he wanted to rise his throne up above God's throne. It is the heart of all of it. It's not simply the feminism, but feminism is an expression of Vaterhass. But we bring Vaterhass to the issue of families when we look at a family and we want to claim sovereignty in how many children we have or whether we will have children or not. We want to claim sovereignty like it's our responsibility or something. But it's not. To have children is the command of God. It's not an option. What do you think, Jonathan?
Which psalm is that? I forget the numbers, but except the Lord build the house, the laborers labor in vain. And then it goes from that directly into children are a blessing from the Lord. And blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. To me, that's the worldview, the view of the scriptures and of the Abrahamic faith from the very beginning toward the reproduction of the image of God. In the image of God, Moses tells us there right at the beginning, in the image of God, made he him, male and female, made he them. So we are bearers or imagers, some would say. Dr. Michael Heiser really points this out. We're imagers of him. We're here to reflect his image. And so when we talk about the sexual reproduction, we don't reproduce asexually. We reproduce sexually. What are we reproducing? And biblically, that would be the image of the Father. And you're talking about the hatred of the Father. So what better and more fundamental way would the one who is in opposition to the Father, the one whom the Father threw out of heaven on his ass, than to get those who are bearing his image and have the ability to reproduce to actually tweak that. We talk about nuclear energy, which can be used, for electrical energy or to destroy and build bombs. But it all comes down, I'm not a nuclear physicist, but what we've been told our whole lives from the Manhattan Project, it came down to something happening where those bonds that hold that which is nuclear together, and we talk about the nuclear family. If you can just get down in there, whether it's hydrogen atom, but at the very core of this tiny little thing, just like if you can move the foundation of a house just a little bit on that transit, the whole building, by the third floor, the whole building is at risk of falling over. So if the devil can tweak this place of libido, which is what drives at a certain level the drive to reproduce sexually, subconscious and conscious, if he can tweak that, if he can change that, I think that's the ultimate witchcraft that can instead of the devil investing, he's not having unlimited resources, and evil men don't have unlimited resources. So if they want to use them as effectively as they possibly can to rather than have to build an army and fight the Vaterhass war to fight the Father and fight everyone who serves him, if you can get them to sabotage the reproduction of his image, the Father's image, God's image, in their own loins and in their own process of reproduction, to overrule him. You've won before anybody's even picked up a weapon. You see, because if there's no more of him, or if the process of reproducing his image, I think that's the ultimate witchcraft. The ultimate witchcraft is to reach down into that place where the very identity of God is at question. What are we reproducing? As a man, when I give my seed to the woman, I'm reproducing the image of God. Whether I think of it that way or not, that's where the drive comes from. That deep-seated subconscious desire to reproduce. Well, if as Christians, I can't talk about this across the board, really. I'd like to hone in on if as Christians, on the one hand, we say we serve the Father, we preach God the Father, God the Son, eternally begotten of the Father. There's that word begotten. If I'm preaching that Father, and yet he revealed himself from the very beginning. What does our first mother Eve say? Behold, I have gotten a man-child of the Elohim, of the Lord. That's what she said. And then we go on to these points, these fulcrums of Revelation, where God reaches in a special way, again with Abram and Sarah, all the way into the New Testament with Elizabeth and John, but over and over and over in between, there's other instances of God specially intervening with either a barren woman like Hannah, the mother of the prophet Samuel, but all the way from our mother Eve getting a child. God reveals himself as the womb opener and the womb closer. And Rachel was the one that Jacob was in love with. He never wanted Leah. That got foisted upon him by her father. And there's no record that I can think of or remember of him ever being annoyed with her, except in one instance, there in the Pentateuch, is when she started accusing him, that is the patriarch Jacob, of being responsible for the fact that she wasn't bearing children like her sister Leah. And he was doing his part. He wasn't failing. He wasn't failing to inseminate her. And it's the only time in the Pentateuch where it says anything like this, that Jacob was wroth. He was angry. He was annoyed, extremely annoyed with Rachel. And he said, am I the Lord who hath withheld from you the fruit of the womb? So that we see this repeated, what's that?
I said,
We see this repetitive and consistent and amplified right up to the conception of God himself in the womb of Mary, prefigured in many ways in Hannah and in her pleadings in the temple of God and in her prayer of thanksgiving, which is very, very similar if you compare them side by side to what we call the Magnificat, Mary's psalm, that daughter of David gave a psalm. And it's all about God opening the womb, God closing the womb, so that if the Christian God, and if the God of Moses, and if the God of the Scriptures, Old and New Testament, has any distinctive, Bob, that separates him from any other God, it is that he uniquely reveals his power. And what's the promise before the serpent and the men, as God does triage in the garden after the horrible accident, the horrible disaster that occurred there? By accident, I'm not, saying no one was at fault. I just mean there's a horrible scene of death, and God's fixing it. And what the first messianic promise, arguably, is there in that her seed, I will put enmity between her seed and the serpent's seed. It's revolving around seed and culminating in the seedless conception of God himself in the womb of a woman. So that there's a special enmity and hatred of the ultimate Vaterhaus guy, which is the devil himself, and everyone who falls under his bailiwick, consciously or not. And so I think what's happening when Christians, and it never happened openly, I'm sure plenty of Christians did practice contraceptives. And by the way, Bob, I think that's what we should say. I'm not saying we can't use the other terms, but I think we should emphasize the practitioner. They are practitioners of contraceptives, like practitioners of witchcrafts. There's a reason.
It literally means practitioners of preventing life.
Yeah.
How is that not darkness and death just in that definition?
Say that again. I'm not hearing you clearly.
Practitioners of it. Well, I want to get into the underlying principles that deceive people into thinking that this is just an option they have. And one of them is, as Christians, we know that pregnancy doesn't occur because of biological processes. Yes, they are involved, but they are not instigated because of that. We believe that God creates every soul that comes into existence. It is not simply a biological process on your body that you can do something, kind of like if you get a cut on your finger, you can choose whether to put hydrogen peroxide or methylate on the cut and what brand of Band-Aid to put on it. You know, it's not that. This is an act of God that creates every human being that is conceived. And we should not presume upon ourselves authority to mess with that. Because
you seem to have gotten a little further away from the mic.
God.
Are you as near the mic as you were?
It doesn't matter if it's the pill or it's IUDs or anything else, because they are all contraception, which means against life. And
yeah, if you're going to go contra to something,
do work by causing an abortion. The baby is already there. There's already conception, and they both work by causing the baby to not be able to stay in the uterus and grow, and so it dies. So that is abortion, to use the birth control pill or IUDs. But it's beyond that. It is as you were saying, it is the choice to engage in this misbehavior of practicing contraception.
Yes, to dissever. Can you hear me? I'm sorry. I just wanted to dissever the orgasm from the possibility of reproducing the image of God.
Yeah,
I'm going to have this.
I'd like to hold the points. I know you're going to
go ahead
a little bit, because what I'm saying is directly building toward that.
Proceed, sir.
Okay, sir.
Thank you.
Why do we think that this is just an open possibility? As I already stated, we misbelieve, thinking it's just a thing that happens biologically. Children are conceived, and not that it is a specific sovereign act of God to create this person. But we also fail to realize the purpose of marriage. Now, marriage goes back, when you watch in the Old Testament, when they made a sacrifice, and when Abraham made that sacrifice and he split that animal lengthwise down the middle, and then he walked in the middle of it, or he went asleep in that one account where he went asleep and woke up and saw the Father and the Son walking in the pieces, because God was cutting a covenant with Jesus, Abraham's seed, and Abraham secondarily, but directly with Jesus, who would be Abraham's seed.
Wow.
So in the same way of cutting a covenant, the basic form of sex, where both are virgins, that it is cutting a covenant. That's why it's consummating the marriage. Because what is the point of a sacrifice without the dead animal, right? So what is the marriage without the consummation of the marriage? And that is the blood, which she's a virgin, and the look of things, which I'm not going to describe. Everybody knows. He made it to look like that, to look like the same as the animal sacrifice done in cutting a covenant, for a reason. Marriage is holy to God, and its purpose is holy to God. And never in the Bible is marriage separated from children. He made Eve so that Adam and her can have babies. That's why he made her. So there'll be a lot of Adams running around. It wasn't for romance. It doesn't say Adam was lonely. It doesn't say Adam had any ill feelings about being by himself. He walked with God every evening. I wouldn't be lonely in any way.
I'm not even sure what romance means, but it does say God saw that it wasn't good for man to be alone.
Right. It doesn't say that Adam saw it. They said that God saw it. Adam wasn't aware. He was missing nothing. He
I
wasn't
see.
feeling like something was wrong because he was by himself. There's nothing there. It says God saw.
I'd never thought
he
that
was
deeply
alone.
into it before. Good point.
Well, it's simpler to read the text that God wanted a lot more Adams running around so that Adam wouldn't be alone. So he created Eve so that Adam and Eve could be involved in more Adams running around, and Cain and Abel, and all of us down the road from that. So the earth would be full of people.
There's a point I'd like to make, because we can go a long time on this, hours and hours. I could do a whole seminar for a week with you on this and not run out of things to say. I'd like to make a point, if we're going to keep this down to 30 minutes, while it's still in my mind.
That's okay. That's okay.
Okay. Well, what's in my mind at this moment is that I've watched over, I'm only 46 years old. You're a little bit older than me, but I've watched a change occur over my lifetime in America, which I can testify to. That when I was 8 years old, it was still hushed tones to refer to sodomy, gay, this or that, what is it, and shame, and people would, white people would turn red. People who are capable of turning red would turn red, if a child asked and they had to explain it, and they'd find ways to quickly explain it and get it over with, and then you'd be ooh gross. Then around your friends, you'd be ooh gross. Well, you know what's happened the past 20 years, the past 25 years, especially the past 20. Now, people are rejecting it again, and thank God that revulsion process of rejecting the sodomy and just the normalization of sexual aberration, but it became an every TV show. But one thing I want to hone in on, why did this happen? Well, in a way that possibly since the advent of Christianity, there's maybe in elite circles, there were these things going on, but this normalization, since Christianity overtook the Greco-Roman world, it never reached anywhere except in, under Bolshevism it did, and under the French Revolution and Marquis de Sade it did, these atheistic revolutions. So that's when it came into Western society, and then, but in our Anglophone world, it had never gotten that bad until now. Until these past few decades. And my question is, why? And I want to proffer an explanation. And my hypothesis is that even though evangelicals and other forms of Christian coalition tried to resist it and tried to stand against it, why could they not gain the upper hand over sodomites? Why do sodomites rule over us up till today? From Tel Aviv, from San Francisco, from New York, from Washington. Why do they have the ability to keep it where every single state, even conservative states, have to marry a man to a man, have to marry a woman to a woman, and can't stand against Washington, can't buck the so-called authority of the U.S. Supreme Court? Why do they rule over us?
I'll tell you why.
And simply,
I'll tell you why.
Okay, you go ahead. But my answer is this: is that we surrendered I mean Westernized Christians, to the degree to which we normalized contraceptives, even though it may be less gross aesthetically. Speaking of aesthetics, to think about a man and a woman having sex using contraceptives. It's prettier in terms of its natural physiologically, aside from the contraceptives. However, they share the same spirit. To the degree that professing Christians accepted contraceptives, which the Anglicans did in the first quarter or the first half of the 20th century, the first Christian denomination in history to do so, to the degree and it spread all across and made its way even into Catholic laity and practitioner, if not officially. We normalized the decision to actually deliberately and with malice aforethought make the sexual act deliberately and willfully fruitless. That means we are of the same spirit, even though what they do, sodomizing one another, and the only thing they produce is an inseminated turd. But the only thing a man with a woman produces is either just a menstruation, which is just as disgusting as an inseminated turd, or a little rubber thingy full of semen, and that to be thrown in the trash. So we literally are of the same spirit and could therefore have no authority over them. In fact, God gave us over to them as our rightful rulers. I mean sodomites, to rule conservative Christians, because both of us worship the libido and despise the end of sexual reproduction, which is children in the act that is centered around the orgasm. And so the differences are just in the nuances of what our particular fetish is. That's it.
Yeah, it's just a question of appetite. Well, and
Yeah,
you
appetite.
said, let me elaborate on what you said there.
Yeah.
What we've done, as I just said a little while ago, God created marriage for children. And everyone throughout history understood that. Men would get married for the reason of having children. It's a very recent thing in history that people would get married for the idea of romance. In fact, Shakespeare made fun of the idea of a relationship built on romance in Romeo and Juliet. And is it a tragedy or is it a comedy? I don't know. When I read it, I can go either way because it seems like a comedy when you look at it from this point of view. Making fun of that notion. The more we have went toward relationships based on romance, the higher divorce rate goes, because romance comes and goes in any relationship. It's got to be built on
never
something
thought of it that way.
more
Very interesting.
foundational than that. Yeah. Okay. We've separated God in his purpose from marriage, and at the same time separated sex from God's purpose for sex. We try to claim sovereignty over the sex, which is what we're really trying to do when we use contraceptives. It's very little often thought about as the children. We just don't want the burden of the children tied to our frolicking, which the burden of the children, as you said, to separate the orgasm from the possibility of life.
Right.
Now, God created it to be tied together. And I want you to know, I did have sex before I got married. A lot of times, I went for many years without having sex before I met my wife. But I want you to know, when you're married and you want children and you have sex, there's a freedom there that there never was in all the hot sex I had when I was younger. It was never there. You couldn't get enough, and none of it was satisfying in the way that it is when you are open and welcoming the possibility of children.
It's way more enjoyable.
Oh, yeah. And God has a purpose for marriage, and we separate that and create our own purpose for it. Romance, relationship, not being alone, all these kind of things, companionship. And we separate sex into a worshiping of the libido. We're doing it for our pleasure. And in the end, when you take God's purpose out of the marriage bed, Christian married people, when they take God's purpose out of the marriage bed, now I'm not saying that it is not involved pleasure and that God doesn't want it to be pleasureful. I'm saying it is supposed to be pleasureful, but its purpose, its reason for being is children. That marriage is, and that sex is to marriage like the same the communion, the Lord's table is to the cross, the same thing that sex is to marriage. Okay, communion doesn't save you. The cross saves you. And in the same sense, God's purpose for marriage is children. God's purpose for sex is
similar
marriage.
to bulimia.
Well, yeah, but you're going to love my point here is that when we separate God's purpose for marriage, then what happens in that marriage in the bed is out of sorts with God's divine purpose for it. And we turn it into nothing but masturbating with somebody else's body. And we
Mutual
have
masturbation.
turned the holy marriage bed. Hebrews says the marriage bed is holy, but we've turned it into the bed of a harlot in a Christian marriage when we use contraceptives of any kind.
Do you know that none other than Daniel Defoe, the author of Robinson Crusoe, wrote a whole volume what's the name of the title? Marital Infidelities, but it has a longer title. But it was about a whole book about marital whoredoms, about the fact, and he goes through them. He goes about the fact that you can, in fact, use, even if she's your lawfully wedded wife, as a man, you can use or abuse, more appropriately, her as a masturbatory aid. I don't think he uses those words precisely, but that's what the entire book is about. It's a very obscure book written by none other than Daniel Defoe. I say sometimes, referring back to what you said a minute ago, it's worship. It's a form of worship. And in Ephesians, Paul singles out the one flesh union of husband and wife as the image of Christ and the church. Mm-hmm. So that if we are revealing in the marriage bed a union of Christ and the church where Christ is deliberately fruitless with the church, what I would suggest that is sexual atheism. Contraceptives, the practice of contraception or the use of contraceptives is actually sexual atheism. And we are revealing, if we persist in it, it is to be repented of. And if we persist in it, we are revealing not Christ and the church, but Antichrist and the whore.
Yep. Dr. John Wilkie said 30-something years ago, he was a doctor and he was in this field, and he put together the statistical numbers, and he said a married couple who are taking the birth control pill because of its third mechanism and how it works are killing 2 to 3 babies a year without knowing it.
Yeah, no, there's
and that
a
is
whole
a sacrifice
other factor.
To their,
oh,
to
yes,
their
a
new
human
God.
Sacrifice to your new God. Wow.
Yeah.
A human sacrifice to your new God. And I want to clarify what I said a moment ago. I was saying Antichrist. I wasn't saying the sister of Mary. I think some people say she was there at the cross. She was a fine lady. I'm not talking about the anti of Christ, but the Antichrist. In other words, that spirit of the whore that rides the beast. In other words, that spirit, not that it's only them, but that spirit of the Jews who did not repent at the preaching of Peter with those 3,000, but persisted in killing the apostles, in making the Romans and coercing the Romans to kill the apostles the way they coerced them to kill Jesus, and finally became what John called the whore that rides the beast. That's the spirit that we're revealing when we're deliberately fruitless. How were they deliberately fruitless? Jesus alluded to it on the road to the crucifixion, when he said, if these things be done in the green, what shall be done in the dry? He's saying, I'm the life. The life, the seed is here. The life of the vine, right? It's here. It's in me. If this beating and this scourging and this torture is what's happening, this crucifixion, where the life is here, what's going to happen when the life is departed? And that's what we're revealing in contraceptives, or what people reveal in the practice of contraceptives is a facsimile of, a grotesque perversion of sexual reproduction and marriage, where the life is, everything's there, but the life and the potential for more life. That's why I call it witchcraft.
It is, because even in the New Testament, pharmakia, the word that's often translated for sorcery or translated into sorcery or witchcraft, the original Greek word is pharmakia, and it means the illicit use of substances, and be that for partying or be that for medical uses.
Yeah, and even
and that
300
can include devices as well.
Correct. 300 years before Jesus was born, more than 300. Hippocrates, who's a polytheist, swearing his oath in the name of Artemis and Apollo, but even he had the holy insight and the discernment to make his disciples swear an oath that said, I will not give a woman a pessary to induce an abortion. I will not give a woman a pessary to induce an abortion. That would be pharmakia, which would be any form of hormonal or chemical birth control, including the coils. There are many in the pro-life movement. I've run into this, especially in East Africa, but who will try to make an exception and say that pro-life and anti-abortion physicians are still putting coils and IUDs in women and giving chemical hormonal contraceptives because they might not be abortifacient. Let me tell you, that is a lie. It's a fucking lie. It's a lie from the pit of hell. And I can't use
Dr.
too
Billings
strong.
Invented his method with Mother Teresa to provide a way to simply say skip sex on these days and you won't have a baby. That is not an abortifacient. But then the question is, if you're using it to have sex and avoid pregnancy, it's still the same problem. It's still contraception.
Your heart is still deliberately trying to. At least you're not killing somebody. I'll give them this. At least you ain't killing somebody. But yeah,
you're killing the potential of the life that, if there were a life to be, that life dies, and say it was a daughter, all of the eggs in the daughter would have produced her children, would have produced her grandchildren and her great grandchildren. Pretty much, you kill one person and you're killing the world, as they say. Yeah. And that's what you are intentionally saying no to, the possibility of thousands of people that would have lived if you would have had this daughter. You're saying no.
That's true.
To all their lives for your convenience.
That's true. That's true. Our Roman Catholic brethren. I'm not a Roman Catholic. My wife is. My daughter is. But I'm not. I can't. But they have a really good. They have some good strong points, and one of them is their emphasis on vocations. And instead of looking at and teaching, marriage as okay, now this is your license to do bedroom stuff. It is in fact a vocation on par with the priesthood, and it's the work of bringing up more Catholics, more Trinitarian Christians, and it is a holy and in that sense of a priestly vocation. When you really get that in focus from a biblical perspective, it takes on a whole different gravity, and it's not something brave and somber, but it is truly something wonderful and enjoyable and also terrifying, like God himself. Because after all, bringing it back to how we started, we're talking about reproducing the image of the Almighty that we're carrying around with us, the potential for reproducing it and overruling and saying, okay, God, you're great thus far, but leave this part to me. Really?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Isn't that the same thing Satan said to Eve in the garden?
How so?
I mean, really?
Remind me.
Saying God doesn't want you to have all this.
Hath God.
You to have some control outside of God.
Right.
So it all comes back to Waterhouse.
So it removes that sanctity of let marriage be holy before all. Well, that's the meaning of desecrate. The thing you can't desecrate something that's not already sacred. So it presumes that word desecrate presumes that the thing is sacred. You can't desecrate a pig, right? Or a pile of manure. You can't be desecrated, right? So when you desecrate it is when you take deliberate actions to actually make it that which is holy into something vulgar or mundane or lower than that, something which is anti-holy or unholy. And I think that's exactly what we're doing by elevating what practitioners of contraceptives are doing by elevating the libido and saying I've got the right to get my fix, to act like I'm making somebody, but deliberately for non-medical reasons. Let me throw in this caveat, because I bet people freak out to me on that. But for non-legitimate, Hippocratic medical reasons, I'm talking about diagnoses, that I'm just going to overrule my calling and vocation. It would be like a pastor. Well, again, like bulimia, like the sexual version of bulimia, or a pastor, getting up and preaching a wonderful sermon and then mooning everyone, dropping his drawers, and barking like a dog, and like some of them actually do. That's another story there. But then saying, but after all, you give this great sermon and read the Bible, and then say, but after all, what do I know? It's just cutting your legs out from underneath your vocation once you perceive that it is a vocation.
And a woman's vocation is to be a wife and mother. Period. That's the way God made her.
That's right. That's right.
And if she tries to do anything else or to prevent being a mother, she's desecrating her vocation. Yeah.
And when she invests like time and craft and science and chemicals and formulas into levels of sophistication, that's where it moves into the level of actual, like cauldron and newt's tale, witchcraft, because you're actually going out to great sophisticated lengths to be sure that whatever happens here as I get my rocks off, we don't make another person in the image of God.
Yeah. And in the end, you're just using each other as a
masturbatory aid.
As a masturbatory aid. And,
yes, sir.
And that is turning what God called holy, the marriage bed, into the bed of a harlot.
Of a harlot. And we are commanded, that's a New Testament commandment, not to join the members of Christ to an harlot. Now, I think I'll end on this. I would rather, people go to hell for being a whore or a whoremonger and not repenting. But I would rather stand before God at the judgment as a whore who had babies than as a professing Christian who never repented and deliberately practiced contraceptives within the marriage bed.
Yep. Let marriage be held in honor by all, and the marriage bed kept pure,
undefiled,
because God will judge fornicators.
Undefiled.
Yeah, well, but it says because God will judge fornicators. And what is fornication? Fornication doesn't mean sex when you're not married. Fornication means sex outside of God's direction, of God's
purpose. That's where the word porn comes from. It's pornea is the word for it.
That's right.
Every instant.
So fornication means anything you might be doing that is outside of God's design. Now, if you are having sex apart from God's purpose, as we've talked about here, God's purpose is sex in marriage. If you're having sex outside of God's purpose, if you're having it outside of marriage, you are having it outside of God's purpose. But if you're having it in marriage, if you're having sex in marriage, and you're doing it away from God's purpose for marriage, it is fornication. The sex you're having while you're married is fornication because it is out of line with God's ordained purpose for it.
That's right. That's right. That psalm flat out says the fruit of the womb is his reward. That's also what Eve said. That's also what Jacob said. And it's revealed in the New Testament, so that God creates the conception. So if we go contraception, who are we contra to? We are fighting God. I don't see how to falsify that logic.
That's a fact. Well, until next time, this is Bob Hardesty with Bob Hardesty Talks and Panzer Talks.
Thank you, Bob. I'm Jonathan O'Toole with Terror of God podcast at terrorofgod.com. Have a good one.